My name is Kelsey. I'm an advisor with the Alberta Energy Regulator, and this presentation provides a summary of the requirements to meet the Alberta government's 45% methane emission reduction target by 2025. This presentation provides an overview of the Government of Alberta's commitment to methane reduction, estimated oil and gas emissions, summary of the requirements, and emissions reporting and compliance assurance. The Alberta Energy Regulator is the regulator for hydrocarbon resources in Alberta. Our mandate is to ensure the safe, efficient, orderly, and environmentally responsible development of hydrocarbon resources over their entire life cycle. In Canada, methane emissions come from various industries. The largest sources of emissions is from the oil and gas sector, with the vast majority of activity occurring in the provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Approximately 70% of Alberta's methane emissions in 2014 were from the oil and gas sector. Estimates indicate that the largest sources of emissions from oil and gas operations in Alberta are pneumatic devices, fugitive emissions, and general venting. Unless otherwise specified, the requirements apply to upstream oil, gas, and bitumen wells, and facilities, gas plants, pipeline installations, waste storage facilities, and tank terminals that are regulated by the AER. This includes production and injection wells, central processing facilities, fractionation, and straddle plants. The proposed requirements do not apply to oil sands mining schemes, transmission facilities, meter stations and pipelines, or oil sands plants, including upgraders for removing bitumen from the oil sands mines, refineries, railcar loading facilities, downstream distribution facilities, and the AER-regulated facilities that are not related to oil and gas or bitumen production, such as coal water wells, brine wells, or Canadian Energy Regulator regulated facilities. These are the AER directives impacted. Directive 60, which pertains to operations, reporting, record keeping, and emissions requirements, as well as Directive 17, which pertains to measurement and reporting requirements. 2 new manuals are also available. Manual 15, how to estimate methane emissions reporting to the AER, and Manual 16, how to develop a fugitive emissions management program. Regulatory enhancements within Directive 60. The definitions of fuel and flare and vent gas have changed for reporting purposes. Most notably, gases previously defined as fuel gas have been narrowed to only include gas that is combusted, and the released energy is used in upstream oil and gas operations. Any gas sent to flare is deemed flare gas, and any uncombusted gas that vents to the atmosphere is vent gas. Flaring and incineration spacing requirements now include new spacing requirements for enclosed combustors. There is also an increase in flaring limits for small gas plants. This Venn diagram illustrates the layers of regulatory requirements. The requirements limit vent gas through an overall vent gas limit, a defined vent gas limit, fleet average limits, and equipment-specific vent gas limits. For example, pneumatic devices have equipment-specific requirements and are also governed by the overall vent gas limit. Additional requirements address fugitive emissions management, as well as measurement, reporting, and record keeping. Overall vent gas refers to routine and non-routine vent gas. The duty holder must limit overall vent gas at a site to 15,000 cubic meters or 9,000 kilograms of methane per month. The cumulative vent gas from all other sources at a site must not exceed the overall vent gas limit. In effect dates for the requirements. On January 1st, 2020, the changes to the fuel, flare, and vent gas definitions went into effect and changed how volumes are reported in Petronex. Also new for 2020, compressor seal testing begins, methane emission records must be kept, and the first annual methane report is due. A methane reduction retrofit compliance plan, as well as a fugitive emissions management program must be in place. In 2022, crude bitumen battery venting and compressor seals may be managed under a fleet average, and new facility and equipment requirements come into effect, as well as venting limits for existing glycol dehydrators. In 2023, existing pneumatic requirements come into effect, and the overall vent gas limit applies to all sources of vent gas at a site. Unless otherwise stated, all other requirements of Directive 60 are in effect January 1st, 2020. The Methane Reduction Retrofit Compliance Plan. Duty holders are required to develop a Methane Reduction Retrofit Compliance Plan, or MRRCP, that outlines the actions that will be taken before 2023 to ensure that all sites will come into compliance. In the MRRCP, operators must identify the resources allocated to completing the replacements and retrofits and the schedule for the actions. An executive must approve the plan. Venting. Venting represents 20% of Alberta's methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. This 20% does not include emissions from pneumatic devices, compressors, or dehydrators. Vent gas is uncombusted gas that is intentionally released to the atmosphere at upstream oil and gas operations. Vent gas limit for defined vent gas. Defined vent gas refers to vent gas emitted from routine venting, excluding vent gas from pneumatic devices, compressor seals, and glycol dehydrators. Non-routine venting is managed under the overall vent gas limit. The duty holder must limit defined vent gas at a site to 3,000 meters cubed per month, or 1.8 tons of methane per month, at any site with first receipt or production on or after January 1st, 2022. Operators must report the volume and mass of defined vent gas in the annual methane emissions report. Vent gas limits for crude bitumen batteries. The duty holder must limit vent gas from crude bitumen batteries by either managing vent gas at crude bitumen batteries to meet the defined vent gas limit at each site, or adhere to a crude bitumen fleet average. The crude bitumen fleet average limit is applied each month per facility ID from all crude bitumen batteries in a duty holder's fleet, with no site to exceed the overall vent gas limit. Thermal in situ schemes and operations are excluded from the crude bitumen fleet average. Also, batteries with either crude oil wells or crude bitumen wells inside the Peace River area, as defined in Directive 84, are excluded from the fleet average limits for crude bitumen batteries. Semi-annual gas-oil ratio, or GOR, testing is required for crude bitumen batteries managed under the fleet average. Pneumatic devices. Pneumatic devices include pneumatic instruments and pumps that are the largest contributor of approximately 36% of Alberta's oil and gas methane emissions. Pneumatic instruments include devices such as controllers and transducers that use pressurized gas to maintain process conditions. Pneumatic pumps use pressurized gas to inject chemicals, usually to prevent freezing or corrosion. Vent gas limits for pneumatic devices. Pneumatic instruments and pumps installed on or after January 1st, 2022 must control vent gas. Exceptions include instruments that are required to maintain safe operating conditions or to achieve a necessary response time, and there is no other way of accomplishing this while still meeting venting requirement. Pneumatic pumps that are operating less than 750 hours per year are also exempt from these requirements. These new devices that are permitted to vent require a weatherproof tag. Level controllers installed before January 1st, 2022 must reduce venting by either using a relay that minimizes transient or dynamic venting, or by adjusting the actuation frequency to reduce unnecessary actuations. Instruments other than level controllers that are installed before January 1st, 2022 must be retrofit or modified so that the manufacturer specified steady state vent gas rate is less than 0.17 meters cubed per hour. Operators must report the vent volumes and mass from pneumatic instruments and pumps in the annual methane emissions report. Operators must maintain an inventory of pneumatic devices on record. Compressors. Compressors represent 8% of Alberta's methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. This 8% includes compressor seal vents, blowdowns, and engine starts. Vent gas limits for compressor seals. The vent gas limits for compressor seals apply to any reciprocating and centrifugal compressor rated to 75 kilowatts or more that operates for 450 hours or more per calendar year. Compressor starts and blowdowns are exempt from this requirement and form part of the overall vent gas limit. For reciprocating compressors, the requirements apply an annual fleet average rate limit to reciprocating compressors that are installed before January 2022. The fleet average rate limit will also apply to reciprocating compressors that are installed on or after January 1st, 2022 that have fewer than 4 throws. An upper rate limit per throw will also be applied on all reciprocating compressors subject to the fleet average limit. Duty holders must ensure their fleets meet the average rate limit by January 1st, 2022. The duty holder must control vent gas from any reciprocating compressor with 4 or more throws installed on or after January 1st, 2022. For centrifugal compressors, duty holders are subject to a per compressor vent rate limit. If a duty holder discovers that the per compressor vent rate limit is found to exceed the vent rate limit, the duty holder has 90 days to bring the vent rate below the limit. For compressor seal measurements and reporting requirements, duty holders will have an annual compressor seal vent metering requirement and report the annual volume and mass by facility, as well as information specific to each compressor. Glycol dehydrators. Glycol dehydrators represent approximately 3% of Alberta's methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. This 3% includes emissions from refrigeration units, flash tanks, and energy exchange pumps. Glycol dehydrators are used to remove water from gas. The requirements apply a limit of 109 kilograms of methane per day for each dehydrator installed before January 1st, 2022, and a glycol dehydrator rate limit of 68 kilograms of methane per day for glycol dehydrators installed on or after January 1st, 2022. Please refer to Directive 39 for measurement, reporting, and inventory requirements for glycol dehydrators. Fugitive emissions. Fugitive emissions are unintended releases of gas to the atmosphere and include emissions from worn, broken, or loose components, surface casing vent flows, gas migration, and equipment emitting in excess of design or normal operating conditions. Fugitive emissions contribute approximately 30% of the estimated 33.3 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent associated with oil and gas operations. Fugitive emissions management. Survey frequency and repair requirements are based on the concept of risk-based regulatory design. Not all facilities, equipment types, or fugitive emissions require the same level of effort or response. Fugitive emissions survey frequency is triannually for sweet gas plants, sweet compressor stations, and sites with controlled storage tanks. The survey frequency is annually for sour gas plants, sour compressor stations, batteries, terminals, custom treating facilities, and injection or disposal facilities. Fugitive emission screenings are required annually at well sites. Surveys are required starting January 1st, 2020. Once a fugitive emission is identified, operators will have between 24 hours and 30 days to repair. Repair may be postponed for quantified fugitive emissions under 10,000 parts per million and fugitive emissions that require a major shutdown to repair. Alternative detection technologies may be used to complete surveys and screenings. Justification must be provided to the AER upon request. Alternative program design proposals may be submitted to the AER for evaluation and possible approval to be used instead of the stated requirements. Duty holders must report survey dates and counts of fugitive emissions detected per site. Duty holders must keep records of completed surveys using the template provided in Appendix 13 of Directive 60, as well as confirmation of repairs, completed training, and the Fugitive Emissions Management Plan that is in effect. These records must be provided to the AER within 30 days upon request. Fugitive Emissions Management Program. The AER requires that each company develop a fugitive emissions management program. The mandatory elements that must be in a duty holder's fugitive emissions management program are detailed in Appendix 12 and include such things as plans to meet the requirements, procedures regarding training, data management, and continuous improvements, as well as equipment that will be used to conduct surveys. The AER encourages operators to introduce or enhance preventative maintenance practices and ongoing fugitive emissions detection measures to reduce the likelihood of fugitive emissions. Emissions reporting and compliance assurance. Methane emissions reporting. Methane emissions reporting is needed to support the outcomes of the Climate Leadership Plan. This includes tracking progress made towards the 45% reduction outcome in 2025, providing compliance assurance oversight, generating performance reports for government and all stakeholders, and conducting analysis of regulatory effectiveness. OneStop is the tool used for reporting methane emissions. It is a secure, convenient, and integrated website that allows duty holders to interact with many different regulatory functions in one place. The annual methane emissions report includes information about the source categories previously mentioned for the calendar year. The reports are submitted through OneStop and are due the following June of the calendar year being reported. Operators will have the choice of manually entering data for specific facilities or bulk uploading data for facilities at once. They will also be able to review and check their data prior to submission. Reporting for production accounting purposes through Petronex is still required to be conducted on a monthly basis. Compliance assurance. The AER has a robust system for assuring compliance with regulations that is integrated with the OneStop reporting system. The AER will apply the same tools and approaches to enforcing the methane regulations as they go into force. These include educational inspections to ensure field staff are aware of the requirements, data analysis to identify potential non-compliances that aren't directly evident, and desktop audits for review of all records alongside reported data and field inspections. For more detailed information, the directives are available online at aer.ca. For further information on methane reduction in Alberta, please visit the link listed on this slide. For additional questions, please email methane.reduction@aer.ca.